Somewhere in the frozen backcountry of Alaska, a third-generation gold miner named Wyatt Kessler may have just stumbled onto something that could rewrite everything anyone thought they knew about placer mining. Early estimates from his crew's latest dig suggest a gold zone that could be worth as much as $150 million. And if even half of that number holds up, it would be one of the biggest strikes in modern small-scale mining history. But before we get into what Wyatt found buried beneath the permafrost, you need to understand just how close his operation came to shutting down completely before any of this happened. Stick around, because the story behind this discovery is stranger than anyone expected. If you love real mining drama, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because this season is about to get wild. 3 weeks before the strike, Wyatt Kessler's operation was hanging by a thread. His crew had spent the entire spring chasing a played-out channel that barely covered fuel costs, let alone payroll. Equipment was aging, morale was low, and more than one crew member had quietly started looking for work elsewhere. Wyatt's grandfather had built the claim decades earlier, and the weight of losing it sat on him every single night. Then his lead geologist, a sharp, soft-spoken woman named Priya Anand, pulled him aside with a set of old survey maps nobody on the crew had looked at in years. Buried in the paperwork was a notation about a shifted creek bed from nearly a century ago, a channel that had moved, leaving behind ground nobody had ever properly tested. It was a long shot, but a long shot was better than watching the whole operation collapse. Wyatt made the call to gamble what little budget remained on a series of test holes along that abandoned channel. It wasn't a decision he made lightly. Drilling costs money, time, and fuel, all three of which were already stretched thin. The crew loaded up 2 drill rigs and pushed out to the far edge of the claim, an area so remote it took nearly 2 hours just to reach on the rough access road. Nobody said it out loud, but everyone understood this was close to a last shot. If the ground came back dry, there wouldn't be another season to try again. The first few holes came back unremarkable, some color, nothing spectacular. Then hole number 6 hit something different. The core sample from that hole showed a thick band of gravel with visible flecks of gold running almost the entire length of the tube. Priya called Wyatt out to the site immediately. He knelt down in the mud, turning the sample over in his gloved hands. And for a long moment, he didn't say anything at all. The crew gathered around, quiet, waiting. Finally, Wyatt looked up and said they needed more holes, and they needed them fast. Over the next several days, the team drilled outward in every direction from that first stronghold, trying to map the edges of whatever they'd found. Hole after hole kept coming back with the same pattern. Thick gravel, consistent gold, almost no barren ground in between. What made the discovery unusual wasn't just the gold itself, but the shape of it underground. Priya's ground-penetrating radar scans revealed something that looked like the ghost of an ancient riverbed, winding beneath the surface far wider than anyone expected. She explained to Wyatt that a channel like this could have been carrying gold-bearing gravel for thousands of years before shifting course and burying the richest material under layers of overburden. If her read was correct, this wasn't a small pocket. It was potentially a long, continuous deposit stretching across a huge section of the claim nobody had ever seriously considered mining before. Wyatt later admitted, sitting on the tailgate of his truck after a long shift, that hearing her explain it made his stomach drop, in a good way and a terrifying way at the same time. Rather than celebrate, Wyatt did something a lot of miners in his position wouldn't have had the discipline to do. He slowed everything down. Every sample from those test holes was split, bagged, and sent to 2 separate independent labs so the results could be cross-checked against each other. He knew that acting on a single set of numbers, especially numbers this big, could lead to disaster if the estimate turned out to be inflated by a lucky cluster of samples. The whole crew spent an anxious week waiting on lab results, while continuing smaller-scale test drilling elsewhere on the property, trying not to get ahead of themselves. When the first lab report came back, gold concentrations were significantly higher than the initial field readings had suggested. When the second lab's numbers arrived days later, they lined up almost exactly with the first. With 2 independent confirmations in hand, Wyatt finally greenlit a full mobilization. Excavators, a second wash plant, and additional crew were brought in within days. The operation shifted to around-the-clock shifts, floodlights burning through the short Alaskan nights, so the machines never had to stop moving. Wyatt made it clear to everyone on site that this wasn't going to be a reckless free-for-all. Every load of paid dirt was tracked, every cleanup logged, and safety briefings happened at the start of every single shift because deep excavation on unfamiliar ground carried real risk, especially with unstable overburden in a few sections near the old channel's edge. He'd seen enough seasons go sideways from a crew getting overconfident, and he wasn't about to let that happen here. The first major cleanup after the ramp-up left even the most experienced hands on the crew stunned. Gold recovery numbers came in well above anything the operation had produced in years, and the pattern held for cleanup after cleanup that followed. One of the longtime equipment operators, a weather veteran named Doug Marsh, who'd worked gold claims across 3 different states, said on camera that he hadn't seen recovery numbers climb that consistently in over 2 decades of mining. The deeper the excavators pushed into the old channel, the richer the gravel seemed to get, which lined up almost perfectly with Priya's theory about a buried riverbed carrying gold down through the layers over thousands of years. Doug joked that he'd stopped trusting his own eyes by the 3rd week because every cleanup felt like it should have been the peak, and then the next one topped it again. As the weeks went on, Priya and an outside consulting geologist began building a resource estimate using the combined data from drilling, lab results, and the ground-penetrating radar scans. It wasn't a quick process. They ran the numbers multiple times, adjusting for grade variability, recovery efficiency, and the uncertain boundaries of the deposit. When the final range came back, even the geologists were surprised by how high it climbed. Depending on how far the channel extended beyond the tested area, the total value of the gold still in the ground could fall somewhere between $60 million and a staggering $150 million. Priya was careful to stress, both to Wyatt and later on camera, that the top end of that range depended entirely on the channel continuing at the same richness for its full length, something that could only be confirmed with further drilling. Word of the discovery didn't stay contained to Wyatt's camp for long. Once a few clips of the record cleanup started circulating among mining forums and industry contacts, calls started coming in from equipment suppliers, potential investors, and even a few rival operations curious whether the rumors were true. Wyatt largely stayed quiet, declining to confirm specific numbers publicly and insisting the operation needed more verification before making any big claims. A couple of well-known figures from the broader mining community reportedly reached out privately to congratulate him, though Wyatt kept those conversations off camera, saying he didn't want outside excitement to distract the crew from finishing the season's work. He told one interviewer that the worst thing he could do right now was start believing his own headlines before the gold was actually weighed and locked in the vault. Not everyone on the team was fully convinced the good fortune would hold. One of the younger crew members, a second-season hand named Callum, admitted in an on-camera moment that part of him was waiting for the numbers to crash back down to earth, the way big early estimates sometimes do in this industry. Wyatt didn't dismiss the concern. He told the crew straight out that nothing was guaranteed until the ground was fully worked and the gold was actually sitting in the vault, not just estimated on paper. That kind of grounded caution became something of a theme for the rest of the season, with Wyatt repeatedly reminding everyone that a strong estimate is not the same thing as money in the bank. He'd grown up watching his grandfather deal with seasons that looked incredible on paper and fell apart in practice, and he wasn't going to repeat that mistake in front of his own crew. Even so, the momentum on site was impossible to ignore. New drill targets kept getting selected as the channel appeared to bend and widen in directions nobody had originally mapped. Priya's team began referring to it informally as the Long Vein, a nod to just how far the gold-bearing gravel seemed to stretch beneath ground that had sat untouched for a century. Each new hole that came back positive added a little more weight to the idea that Wyatt's operation might be sitting on something that went far beyond a single lucky pocket. Whether it would ultimately reach the full $150 million estimate remained, by everyone's own admission, still unconfirmed, and Priya kept a running log of every hole so the team could track how the estimate shifted week to week rather than getting swept up in the biggest number they'd heard once and repeating it as fact. Midway through the surge, the operation hit its first real scare. During a night shift, one of the excavator operators noticed a section of the pit wall along the old channel's edge starting to slump, a sign that the ground there was less stable than the rest of the site. Wyatt halted work in that section immediately, pulled every machine back to a safe distance, and brought in a geotechnical consultant the very next morning to assess the slope. It cost the crew nearly 2 full days of production at the height of their best run of the season, and a few of the younger hands grumbled about the lost time. Wyatt didn't budge. He told the crew flatly that no amount of gold was worth somebody getting hurt, and that the operation would wait as long as it needed to before anyone went back into that section. The consultant eventually cleared the area with a revised excavation angle, and work resumed, slower and more careful than before, but without a single injury on site the entire season. That kind of caution paid off in ways that went beyond safety. By slowing down and reinforcing the pit walls properly, the crew was able to push the excavation deeper than they'd originally planned without losing any more ground to slumping. And it was in that deeper layer, almost by accident, that the richest gravel of the entire season turned up. Doug was running the excavator when he pulled a bucket load that visibly sparkled under the floodlights, more color than anyone on site had seen in a single pass all year. He radioed it in immediately, and within minutes half the crew had gathered around the pile, phones out, before Wyatt reminded everyone to get back to work and save the celebration for the cleanup. That single load alone accounted for a noticeable jump in that week's total recovery numbers. News of the deeper strike reached Pria's geological team almost the same day, and they moved quickly to drill a fresh set of confirmation holes around that pocket. The results came back even stronger than the surrounding channel, suggesting the deposit might have a richer core running through its center, the kind of concentrated zone that could account for a disproportionate share of the total estimated value. It was exactly the kind of pattern Priya had hoped to find, but hadn't wanted to promise the crew, not wanted to raise expectations that might not pan out. When she finally showed Wyatt the updated model, he reportedly sat with it for a long time before saying anything, running his thumb along the printed map, where the richest section had been outlined in red.